Okay, that concludes that portion. Okay, next we're going to go to item 6. These are our legislative session items. Previously, when we put the schedule together, we allotted a couple hours. This is a very important time, and looking at our clock, and you know, there's good reasons that we started a little late. You know, safety is always important, but the storm set us back. So, if we were to set kind of a little bit of a personal goal here, there's two pieces of this. There's the budget request piece, and then also that would include Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, and then the legislative session piece by Deputy Superintendent Angie Starling. So it looks like we're going to do this. We're going to start on 6.3. Or what are we going to do for? Is that what? What I'm saying is we're going to split this up into two parts. We're going to take one half. We do have a time certain at 12:15 with Representative Polson going to be here. Then we'll most likely have our lunch, and then we'll go to the second piece, and everything else on our agenda is going to slide a little bit. So, are we going to do Scott first?
Okay.
All right. Okay, Scott. The only thing standing between this board and their lunch is this agenda item. So,
We,
no pressure on you, but this is important.
hey, sir, pressure makes diamonds, right? So, here we go. So, come on, thank you. Come on.
Okay.
Okay, can we invite Del Frost up and Patrick and Deborah as well, too, just in case there's questions.
All come
real
up.
quick.
Can we find you another chair?
Yeah. I mean, I'll have control of the mic, but, you know, they can.
Oh, you're working on that diamond thing, I can tell.
Yeah, exactly.
So all of this is happening. A lot has been happening on the Hill. There's some things about money, how much money we might have. There's recommendations from staff. There's been quite a bit.
Okay, while we're pulling up the backups and going through this, if board members will also go in right now and take a look at what we posted as far as where we're at with your top 10 priorities. And then also, we're going to just cover real quickly where we're at as far as the Public Education and Appropriations Committee process. I mean, there's remaining meetings left. We've been doing really well with our synergy with the legislature as far as, you know, getting your recommendations and your proposals to them. It is line item centric though, so some of them have not been entirely covered yet, but will be in the course of the Public Education's Appropriations Committee meetings. You know, we don't set that agenda, and the line items are what they are. And so, again, we'll just really quickly go back through the 10 priorities, and then what we call the quad charts that support those priorities and the briefings that we give to Public Education and Appropriations without having to go through all the 10 questions and the details of those business cases that you all reviewed and went through as part of this process. So, yeah, can you try to pull them up? So, Dale, there's a microphone right there. Why don't you key on that one? And go ahead and just walk them through the, you know, what we talked about, the 10 priorities, and yeah.
Hey, you're on.
Chair, if I may, while Deborah brings this up, we tried to create a couple charts to clearly show lawmakers what are the top 10 priorities as set by the board, and how do they align to the board's strategic plan. And then we also added a slide for the other 3 business cases that are directly aligned to the strategic plan that have not yet been prioritized by the board as an information item to legislators. And then in the slides, we show what those priorities are, and in the quad charts, as you're probably familiar, we're answering the basic questions on what is the problem, how will this funding issue how will this business case solve that problem, and what are the effects if it's not funded? So I don't know what questions you'd have
Go
otherwise.
ahead and so scroll down.
Okay,
Doug.
great, thank you.
So at the opening of every public education appropriations meeting, we always start with your goals. As you know, Superintendent Dixon and Chief of Staff Stanley went forward in the first meeting and really did a great job of aligning the requests with PEA, with those legislators on your direction and your goals, and what requests support the strategic plan. Again, though, you know, the PEA agendas are set up by line item, so we're not quite through all of the different top 10. So if you scroll down a little further, we provide this to the Public Education Appropriations Committee, i.e. the legislature as a whole, because it's put into their backups, which identifies the top 10 priorities that you have designated for your budget with them. One of the key takeaways from this discussion or this process too is that the chairs of the Appropriations Committee have said, hey, look, you know, there's a certain amount of revenue that right now is available for public education of around 292 million. Did I get that right? Yeah, 292. Well, the governor.
They said around
Right.
290, 300 million.
Right.
That's correct.
So right now, if you keep scrolling
It's
down,
right there.
Deborah,
There's the 280.
right, it'll total the 288.
You go up right there
Yeah.
at the bottom of the top
Right there
10.
at the bottom. So we're aligning well with the revenue that's out there for now. It could change. You know, there's a lot of discussions that are going on, you know, as far as the education fund, the general fund. You know, I won't go down the tax reform road. But all that's relevant to this process as we progress together with the legislature and stay disciplined and approach this from your perspective of your top 10 priorities. One key aspect that came out in yesterday's Public Education Appropriations meeting is that the LFAs, the legislative fiscal analysts that obviously work for the legislature, have proposed a 4.5% WPU increase, right, which is different than the 6%. You'll also note that if you'll scroll down to the first request is the 6% WPU value increase. And this is where I want to just pause for a moment for you to also reflect, is we get lots of questions about, well, what other implications of a percentage increase to the WPU are out there? You'll find those in the lower left-hand quadrant of this chart, which we briefed the Public Education Appropriations Committee on. So as part of our iterative process, we just as staff come to you and request that you review the top 10 priorities, and then we advise you on where the Public Education Appropriations Committee is at with their particular processes and where they're at with their requests, and see if you want to make any changes or discuss and make any actions or changes to any one of your priorities, the amounts to them in this meeting, so that we progress together. And then, you know, again, you meet next Thursday, but there'll be two more, there'll be two more Public Education Appropriations Committee meetings before you meet next Thursday, right? So we just want to make sure that we're always aligned with you, your direction. And so Chair, I'll come back to you and open it up for any questions or concerns about the top 10 priorities and anything I've discussed or let you know about where things are at with the Public Education Appropriations Legislative Committee.
Okay, and maybe a little bit of background. I've been in the appropriation meetings and they've been giving us quite a bit of direction on our legislative. They haven't said no to anything yet, but they're certainly listening to us. And so we represent staff, and then myself, and when I'm there, these are our priorities. At the same time, the question has been, so what about those others? How come they're not in your top 10 and et cetera? And they're still, and then we explain they're still relevant to us, but at the very end, they're only going to have so much money. And they're already sees the end in mind right now, and that's why they've come back. They're not telling us what to do or anything, but the recommendation was going to them from their staff of 4.5 on the WPU. So I'm not making a motion, I'm not saying anything, but if you were to change that in any way, then they would be very interested in, okay, what are you really wanting to get funded? It creates an opportunity to put more of those items into a priority that, again, we're at 200 and on these 10 items, we're at 282. 88 or 80.
283.
280, almost 283 million,
So
Chair.
we're still within that, and so they listen to the board, and the staff listens to the board as we're on the Hill, talking to them through this appropriation process. So the superintendent, do you have something else to add?
Yeah, if I could put an exclamation point on your comments, you will see more and more each day pop up that things that are coming our way that would normally come out of the general fund. And we've talked about this before. We've been told by leadership early on that there would be a shift given the amount or the lack of funding in the general fund. So there's both, I think, a statement of reality and a political statement in all of that. But it helps us as staff if we can stay really tight and get really clear early on. Just yesterday, I think and again this morning, there were 3 new proposals of things to come from the education fund. And leadership from Public Ed Appropriations sends them to you as the board to say, do we need to have a business case? Do we need to get on the agenda? And I so appreciate that the Public Ed Appropriations chairs want them to come to you and make your case, or make their case to you all. But that list is going to be ever expanding. Scott, I think the deadline for appropriations request is noon today. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. Although the process will allow that, since we've already shared what your priorities are, what the board's priorities are, and all of the requests, those are technically have made the deadline, right, as far as the requests go. If there's additional requests that need to take place, for instance, a legislator wants to open a bill, really the deadline is more on them because you've already made your proposal and all of these requests are in front of them way ahead of the deadline. Does that make sense? So yes, that's right. The deadline is tomorrow. So really what you'll hear, what they're pushing for is any additional requests beyond yours by individual legislators or the public or whatever. That's my understanding where we're at with this. But all of your requests have been received by the LFA.
So I bring that
by
up,
the
sir,
deadline.
because you all may get approached in the next 24 hours to advocate for something, and we're not saying you should or shouldn't, but just know that there will be more things coming fast and furious that may normally, if they have any attachment to education at all, they're looking at the education fund. So it helps us if you can give us really clear direction about what your priorities are and any changes that you want to make.
And this is a good segue to the point of, so I'm correct in saying all of your requests are in front of them. However, we received additional business cases from the State Charter School Board for your consideration as part of this process as well. So if we need to move those forward from your body, now my understanding is that, and we can defer to the staff of the SCSB or the SCSB members to come forward, but I'm aware of one particular bill where one of their business cases has FTEs to the extent of about $425,000. So technically that would have met the deadline because that's part of the bill, but there's other business cases that you may want to ask them to come forward and present to you so that as staff we know how to proceed at your direction with those business cases to meet the deadline that the superintendent, that's also part of this agenda item or for that discussion,
So this is a really important meeting.
Right.
And thank you, Superintendent, because it was unique to have them in the very beginning through the Education Appropriation Committee to say publicly, if there's anything that anyone wants to attach, please route it through the State Board of Education. That hasn't happened, to my knowledge, in the past. And so a little bit more burden, but then there's, again, those requests can come slipping in, and we act as a board, and we only have so many board meetings through this process, so it'll be interesting to see what happens, but just be prepared, so.
Right, and I'll just reiterate too, the timing, if I may, Chair, the timing of it is that there will be 2 more Public Education Appropriations Committee meetings where we'll continue to put your requests in front of them, making sure they know your priorities, subject to change today or any time by you, in front of them, meeting, the timelines and all of the processes and procedures that go with the Budgetary Procedures Act, the law that governs this. So at this point, Chair, I'll come back to you and ask if there's any questions or concerns about the top 10 as we've and Deborah, will you just scroll down, just give them and the public
Okay,
vision of
I've got a
this?
couple
So,
comments
okay.
or questions,
Sure.
and so we might as well dive into it. Board Member Lear?
Thank you. My comment is more to Superintendent's comment about the education fund and the legislature generally and legislators' comments that this will be happening. I personally have a problem with that. I don't think that that is something that the board needs to accept without comment. I think speaking for my constituents, and I feel like the school children of Utah, there are some requests that are not school requests, they are community requests. And I will continue to speak up about that. I think it's flattering that legislators are directing those non-education or barely education-related requests through the state board, but it's still, they are primarily community issues. And I think it's a decision by the legislature to say that the pot of money for education is limited and you're going to fit these things into it. And I feel like that needs to be at least an expression I make, that I am not always comfortable with those programs coming out of the State Board of Education.
But I believe the intent from the legislators and the education appropriations was there's been an evolution of how we go and make our requests. And you can, those of you that have been here, even the last year to this year, see the improvements in that, and they like the system that we have in place now with our business cases and how it links to our board goals. And, you know, the speaker said in one of our education meetings, I can't remember what one it is, he says, you can rise to your goal, you can try to rise up to your goals, but you'll always fall to something about your systems that you have in place, or you'll fall to the level of your system. Well, this is an improvement. We're constantly trying to improve, and so anything that we ever do as a board, and we're rolling it forward, we'll follow the system that we have in place and meet these expectations that you see that we use to present and track through the whole appropriations process. So I think that's what they're complimenting a little bit, and they definitely want our fingerprints on, so we will be able to weigh in more if they take that lead, but that's not a guarantee that they will.
Can I just follow
You
up
bet.
briefly? And I do understand that
Yeah.
they are complementing our systems, and I am flattered at that, and not because I've done anything about systems, these folks have, but I still think it's important to note that there are education programs and there are non-education programs. And to me, this is just me speaking, I feel a little punitive sometimes that everything is lumped into the education fund when there are clearly community-based programs that should be funded through, I think, other sources.
And we have that opportunity to weigh in on it in this particular meeting and our
And I am weighing.
legislative meetings also. So
Consider me weighed.
okay, all right, Board Member Belknap,
Thank you, Chair. Is it okay if I direct here?
you bet.
Thank you. So Scott, I don't know if this goes to you or Dell, but if the amount that they believe we're going to have, is it 291, 293, somewhere in there?
292
Okay,
is
and so
what I'm tracking.
with our 6% ask and our 10 priorities, we're already at 280, almost 283.
Right.
So that doesn't leave a whole lot. So my question I'm asking, I actually have two questions. The one question I ask, if we remain solid where we are, what about the other asks, like the USDB? What about the charter school? What about those that aren't on here?
Right.
Where do they fall, and is there enough to fill that with what we're asking with our,
Yeah, great question. So Chair, the USDB piece to it, for their steps and lanes, that's a requirement in law, right? So we don't prioritize that.
but it
So,
still has to
right,
come out
But it still
somewhere.
comes out, right, then, well,
Yes.
that's subject to the legislative acts, right? How they appropriate and do all that within, right now, as of this date time group, we're tracking 292 million. So yes, conceivably or conceptually, if they fund the steps and lanes and they use that, that could decrement the ability, right? So my staff agrees to that. So that's, I think, what you're asking, right? So what we do, though, is we say, if it's legally required, you know, legally required act, we put it to the side, so to speak. We don't dismiss it or anything, but we don't include it in your top 10 priorities because it's going to happen anyway by law. So that's what we're projecting is that, you know, I think this is the point you're making with your question, is that there are some of these, you know, USDB type requests that will be legally required that could potentially or will decrement the availability of funds for your other asks or requests. And then from there, as we progress through the top 10 or, you know, your priorities, other requests are being brought forward to the Public Education Appropriations Committee appropriately, so that when we get to, it's usually the second or the third to the last meeting, where we basically bundle it all together. We say, final, you know, this is the revenue, go with this, what are your priorities? You know, for those of you that have been on the board for several years, you're used to that. And they come back and say, okay, what's your final priorities? And then they make their motions, PEA does, and their recommendations to Executive Appropriations Committee based on what they're being told is the available revenue from the education fund. So there could be decrements that occur depending on, to the superintendent's point, all of the other activities and actions that are occurring by the legislature related to the education and/or general fund. So.
Okay, follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. And what about higher ed? Where is higher ed going to fall in this 293 this year?
Dale, you wanna-
Chair, if I may, Member Belknap, great question. As the 292 number, where that comes from is the public ed spending that was allocated in the governor's budget. What we've heard is it's between 290 and 300
Right.
from the public ed. So but that's not including what would be added to the higher ed budget, because in the governor's budget, there were additions to the higher ed budget above the 292. So I think a good rule of thumb is to estimate between 290 and 300 for the board. You'd be in a good place, and there would be enough for higher ed. But to your point, Member Belknap, there are non-prioritized budget items, USDB, TSSP, other things that would have significant impacts if not funded, that are not part of the 283 right now of the top 10.
One
If
more.
that helps.
One more follow-up, and then.
Then I'll be
Yeah.
done for a minute.
Okay.
So if I heard you correctly, then also, if those other things are funded, like if TSSP is funded, then our priorities are going to get moved down because it will take off the top. But my question is, and Scott, I'm not sure, you may know this, for every percentage of a WPU increase, what does it increase the income tax? I can't remember
It's
what that was.
5.2 million is what I've been told would be the impact of a 1% increase. It's 5.2.
Okay,
Member Belknap, you said income tax. Do you mean the local
Oh, you mean
property taxes?
Property
No, I knew what you meant. No, yeah, property tax,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Property tax, right.
Right.
5.2 million.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
My question is similar to Board Member Belknap's. Would it be possible for us to have kind of that column that you're talking about, those things that the legislature will most likely do because of law, right? So the things that we've talked about, the steps and lanes for USDB, the
You have that at the top.
TSSP, et cetera. So those items that we've talked about that we are not putting on our priority list, but we have the expectation that they're going to be funded. That way, we just have a honest look in our minds when we're looking at the available funds and our priorities and seeing really what the difference between the two is.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I thought we did have a handout where we did have those broken out at the top.
Well,
Which one was that? Did you take that one out?
yes, I took that
Okay.
out.
Okay, we'll get it back in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we would just
have
need
that.
to put that back in and
Okay.
do a little calculating.
Sure, yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Board Member Davis.
I don't know when there would be an appropriate time, but you mentioned that it would be good to hear from our state charter school board
yes.
Is this
So-
the time that we need to
Yes.
invite
it
those
is.
Yeah,
folks up?
Yeah, so, yes, ma'am. So if you want to pull those business cases up. Well, first, Chair, if I may, just, are there any other questions or concerns about the board's top 10 at this point, or?
Okay, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
So we currently have on our top 10 some really big ticket items, but it feels like a lot of the little things that are priorities for this office, like maintaining certain programs, and they're smaller items, but they're just down kind of in this spreadsheet way low. However, there is a decent amount of priority to them, like, monitoring and some of the UPAC task force recommendations are kind of buried in this spreadsheet, right? But they're not in those big tickets. And so I guess I'm wondering how we might be able to move forward in prioritizing some of those things that are below the line, should we call it? That are
Outside the 10.
outside the 10,
Outside the
so that we can, so if those 10 things are funded, what are some of those other things? Because there might be a few that are more important than others. So is that?
Yeah, that's a process that we've taken in the past. Not every year we don't do that. I mean, every year's different as far as revenue availability. But I'd encourage that, just that way we know that should it come to a point where we're told that we get additional funding or there's additional funding available, that all, if conceivably all the top 10 were funded, those required by law, and then they said, well, here's some additional funding, where do you want to go with that? I think that's what you're asking, right? Yeah, so that's why I just wanted, before we segue into other items in this particular agenda item, is to focus on making sure that staff are clear on that your top 10 priorities are remain, and also open it up to additional prioritization, if you will, beyond that line.
So there's, for the benefit of the board, we've already gone through this process of what are our priorities.
Right.
That priorities, when you go to that sheet, maybe I'm looking at the wrong sheet here, but I believe our priorities is the total is 403,716,000.
Well, I think what you're saying, Chair, is the total of all of your requests.
Those are the total
Yeah,
requests.
that's
Yeah,
what we've
is-
already,
is
we've
that.
already set this request. Here's our request.
Right.
Which is 400 and,
3 million, yep.
yeah.
But I'm thinking what Vice Chair Cummins is at is that, okay, so where does it go beyond the top 10 as far as, if additional revenue were made available, what's next after
So,
number 10?
But as we're trying to answer that question, we also need to put ourselves in the shoes of Public Ed Appro, because they're seeing all of this, and they're gonna, at the end, when there's only 300,000, then they're gonna start making some decisions.
Right.
And they'll make those decisions. They do every
true,
year. And so we're Vice Chair
Right.
Cummings is, do we have additional priorities that we absolutely, we're not saying no to these things. So what they'll do, based on what they've done in the past, or I can't guarantee what they'll do, is they'll shave off they'll take from the WPU and come down, and then these things, some of these things will get funded or partially funded, and some might not get funded at all, but that's what's gonna happen when they're done. And so the top 10 list is important. It might be at the top 15, but through that process, we're also saying these other programs are not relevant. So I still want to throw that caution. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Yeah, but I think part of it is helping the legislature make that decision. So because our list is so long, not leaving for their discretion to kind of pick some of those, because there are some of those items that are more critical than others that are below that top 10 line. And so if they don't know which ones are the most critical, and they're smaller asks, but some of them might be significant. And so what are the ones that are more critical for them to not just completely disregard and say, oh, we don't need to that. And so I'm just saying that maybe a little bit of prioritization underneath those top 10 might be helpful, so that those things on the very bottom would be easy to say, okay, these are things that are less critical for the board, that as far as funding goes. So that.
Chair, if I may, I have a point salient to Vice Chair Cummins' proposal or idea, and that is, by next board meeting, we will not know exactly where PEA and all their priorities. However, by then, the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office will have given all of their recommendations for all the line items. For example, LFA has already recommended 4.5% WPU, as Scott had mentioned. Other examples, Vice Chair Cummins, you had mentioned UPPAC. Both of those business cases were recommended by LFA. But we still have 2 more meetings where those are going to be discussed. By next meeting, we can give you a complete list of LFA's recommendations. And they kind of go through that process for all 38 business cases. And then we can kind of compare and contrast for you what they're recommending compared to the top 10 or whatever, or the 38. And that may provide some light on those kind of discussions. I don't know if that's helpful.
And maybe, Cindy, Board Member Davis brought it up, maybe this is a good time. We have people here that have come on the state charter school. They have a business request. Would this be a good time to address that? Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones?
Yes, sir. It's in your direction. Yes, sir. Okay. Do you want to invite them up, or?
Yeah, let's invite them up. How many do we have? And who's going to run the program and the screen? Director Lambert, are you leading this discussion, or do you want to introduce?
I think Vice Chair Tonks will introduce us. Yes, thank you for having us here
Okay.
today, and I bring apologies from Chair Alenkowski, who is currently on a plane to a different state. Otherwise, she would have been here herself. We have Member Moss.
Over there.
They directed me to the mic over here. Sorry.
Member Jim Moss joining us, and also our Executive Director, Jennifer Lambert. We've tasked her with putting our case study and our budget together for our request to join in with USBE, and she's prepared to present that today.
So good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for having us. The State Charter School Board has been busy the last year. And we've also been listening to feedback, and we've been looking at ourselves, reviewing our processes. And we've been making a number of changes, changes with current capacity and current staff, including increased trainings to schools' governing boards, some adjustments to our own processes, some increased training in finances. But as we're looking at what we are currently doing, we realize that we are pretty much already beyond capacity. The good news is that our implemented oversight model is working. The challenge is that our implemented oversight model is working. And so we are looking at strategically what is the best way to be able to head off problems and to best protect taxpayer funds as well as to increase student outcomes. And so we have put together, this is what you have up here right now, is our total rationale as well as our ask. Deputy Superintendent Jones mentioned HB 242, which is being presented by Representative Moss, which is also coming out of the Charter School Task Force meeting that this board convened. That is making a number of recommended changes. Along with that, we put a request of $425,000 for increased oversight. That would be for an increased financial manager, another investigator, and some oversight support in there. In addition to that, what we really find is that if we can intervene earlier, we can head off problems and it maybe not go to the critical mass that maybe has been in the news recently. And so we look at what other authorizers have done, and we are proposing to have what is called portfolio managers. We would move around some of our existing staff and we request some additional staff for these portfolio managers. These individuals would be tasked with a certain number of schools. With the current ask and current staff each, and the number of charter schools that we have in our portfolio, we would have, for each portfolio manager, would have about 40 schools, which is still pretty high, but we think it's a good place to at least start. That individual would be tasked with being that first point of contact for the schools, offering more individualized support and connection to those schools so that they know what's truly happening in the schools and can offer that support before it becomes a problem and before it has to go into our oversight model. Along with this, we are developing a support model that would be companion to our oversight model that the portfolio managers would also interact with. And so we request also an additional $575,000 that would go to a portfolio support coordinator, 2 additional portfolio managers, and a support for the for those portfolio managers.
Questions from board members? Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
So the vision for these portfolio managers, would it be to provide similar support that maybe a school to a district administrative office might have? Or what do you envision support looking like as you build a team from an individual charter school to this state charter school board?
Well, first off, because of the number that each portfolio manager would have, I don't think it would be able to support it exactly like in a district. So you would have, each individual would have 40 schools. And so if you think what can detailed support they can give to the 40 schools. However, a lot of our schools are doing very well. I know that we hear about charters in the news. We're only hearing about a handful of schools. The majority of our charter schools are doing well and would not need as much detailed support. And we recognize each school's local autonomy. We do not want to interfere with that. However, it would be an individual that a school could go to ask questions, and they wouldn't necessarily know the answers to every question, but they could be that single point of contact who could then find out that answer for that school. It would also be someone that could go and visit that school periodically or go to their board meetings periodically so they know what's actually happening in the field. A lot of times when we're doing our oversight, we are basing our oversight on delayed data. So we're waiting until after the year end when we get the data and we see what has happened, and then we see, okay, there was a problem. What we're hoping is that these portfolio managers can be there more often on the ground, being able to have that connection and perhaps see things or get a feel of the culture if there's a problem before we have to wait for the data to tell us what has happened.
Okay, I've got a question because I've been asked this quite often on the Hill lately. USBE, we have some legislative ask for additional FTEs. We're more and more in the monitoring business and compliance and et cetera. Will these positions, the question I'm being asked is on your legislative ask, are we duplicating services, or are you, I mean, that's the first question that I'm asked. Is SCSB duplicating services that are already provided by USBE? And if so, don't you see that, then I'm asked, don't you see that as a conflict of having two different groups asking certain questions and et cetera, and the monitoring, kind of the monitoring world of compliance? And can you speak to that question?
Yes. So in districts, they also have monitors and compliance and support. They also have their staff, and it doesn't duplicate what you do here. I think that if we can beef up our what we do, it actually allows you to more effectively, well, not effectively, more be able to act as an SEA. I think sometimes with charter schools right now, because we are low on our staff and low on our ability, capability to address all of the issues that are out there, that you're having to pick up the slack on that. And so I think as an SEA, you definitely have monitoring responsibilities. But as an authorizer, we can take on some of the other monitoring that normally a district might have over their schools.
How a district would be doing it internally.
Correct.
Okay. I've got quite a few other questions, but we have other board members that want to weigh in. Board member Lear.
I would personally be more comfortable with this list if this list if you had coordinated with the auditing department, maybe even special ed department, so that there could be, sort of similar to what Chair Huntsman was saying, there could be a collaborative effort on the part of the charter school board, working with the special ed department, who has trained investigators. They understand school programs. They understand special ed requirements. Auditors understand, as they work here longer, understand school problems and school programs. And I fear that if, depending on where your auditors, investigators, managers come from, they may not understand the public school system in Utah. And that doesn't really make for consistency from LEA to LEA. I feel like charter schools, for the most part, should be doing everything that traditional schools should be doing. They should have websites that are up to date. They should have the policies on their website that are required. They should have regular board meetings. And so a lot of that I do see as a collaborative effort in the office. And so I would be more comfortable about this if this were a portfolio manager or a investigator auditor that you shared with the auditing staff, that it was a 50-50 split, and then it's something I would support. But I don't really support these parallel silos growing up under the state school system, which is what the state board is responsible for, is the plenary state education system. And I think that that collaboration would serve both the charter board well and the state board well, so that we could be equally familiar with the problems you're talking about as in their early stages.
Can I respond? So I agree that collaboration, I think, is what we all seek, and I think it is definitely beneficial. I also want to clarify, with this an additional investigator auditor, that would raise our number of investigators to 2. And so you are correct that there is no way that we can have individuals that would have the single expertise that, like, your special education investigators would have, nor do we desire to get in the way of that or to create a parallel process. However, charter schools do have some unique things in that they are set up by a charter agreement. They also have boards that are not elected, and as an authorizer, we can serve as checks and balances on that, which is a separate and a different need than what the staff in your office do and oversee. We also can add additional support, and we do try to do that and work with your staff to be able to support them so that so it doesn't cause so much burden on them to handle these additional 110 LEAs.
And board member, you have a follow-up, board member Lear?
Follow-up, yes. Just a brief response. I know there are some things that are different about charter schools. I work with both charter schools and traditional schools, but I find far more similarities than differences. How special ed students are served should be exactly the same in charter schools and traditional schools. And so I think that that kind of collaboration would be a really healthy sharing of expertise, sharing of investigative skills. And just by the way, it's our office too. It's not the state board office versus the charter board office. It's our state education office. And I really want to feel that and have our personnel crossover so that there can be shared expertise and shared skills.
Board Member Davis?
So I just want to kind of see if I'm understanding what you're saying, right, and then have your board members weigh in, if you will. So I'm hearing you say that these folks that'll be the portfolio managers will do some of the kind of overseeing similar to what a district would do. And I think that everybody here also understands a district has a lot of what they do at a district level has to do with instruction, and that's different in this case because the instruction and methodologies are pretty specific to different charters, and that autonomy wants to be, it sounds like it, that you want to preserve that piece. So this would only be those pieces that are consistent with kind of how public funds are used and maybe some of those federal requirements and special education and things like this. So,
Governance, I think, would be the biggest one.
sorry?
Governance.
Governance, thank you. So I'm hearing you say it is kind of what the LEA does, and we talked a little bit about this previously, but for example, in Colorado, the State Charter Board is an LEA. It's the authorizer, but is the LEA. And so I have heard concerns expressed by fellow board members of yours in the past that would be kind of difficult because there are a lot of reports that are submitted and a lot of things to monitor with not very much staff. So as this evolves, I'm hearing our finance specialist here in the back, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, saying, with USIMS coming, we're going to cut our reports by about 50% that are required. A lot of those are going to be cut down. I'm hearing you say, with some increased staff, we can do more oversight, we can do more monitoring of what's required and maybe intervene earlier on before there are problems. So it to me is sounding like it's looking more of a the State Charter School Board would have LEA capabilities, and it would be somewhat that kind of structure. The Utah State School Board would still be the SEA. I know it's not exactly a parallel, but am I kind of understanding this, what I'm hearing? Can we have our board members weigh in also? And maybe Jennifer, tell me if I'm getting what you're saying.
So I'll start and
Right.
then I'll lead the way. We never want to interfere with your relationship with the charter schools. We don't want to become a barrier between you and your ability or their ability to connect with each other. What we want is we want to help that relationship. We want to kind of grease the wheels, so to speak. I envision these portfolio managers would a number of times be reaching out and saying they get, their boots on the ground, they get questions from schools that the schools may, it's just too much to find who to ask, and so if there's someone there, they're going to ask that question. That person then says, you know what, I know the person to talk to at the State Board of Education. This is their number, I will get you in contact with them. That's how I see it. I also do not see these portfolio managers becoming like a district where, you don't interact with individual district schools. It's always through the district. We don't want to become that gatekeeper.
And I would add to that, Board Member Davis, and I think your question is a germane one, that we sit in a place that our function as an authorizer shares equally the burden of mentoring and monitoring. And in order to shift more of the responsibility to mentoring and building that fence at the edge of the cliff instead of sending the ambulance to the bottom to pick up all the pieces, which is historically what has been done, we would love to be able to have a barrier at the top of the cliff, to be able to work with the schools, to establish relationships, to point them in the right directions before they get to the point where they need massive emergency interventions. We want to triage. We want to take care of the small things when they're small so that they don't become big emergencies at the bottom of the cliff.
Okay. Cindy, did you have a follow-up? You're waiting. Okay. Board Member Moss, did you want to?
Maybe just briefly, I think some of the challenges we faced this year create a good opportunity to evaluate what's working well and where the challenges are. Keep what's great about charters, and it produces some of the top schools in the state, but address some of those challenges that are holding back or creating, in the really bad situations, creating the kind of, real challenges we've had. So, one of the things we've seen that's best is the autonomy that's done well through appropriate local governance. So part of what we're trying to do is step in and support that in a way that's kind of unique to charters, but make sure they're not in a silo alone out there, and that we're stepping in on support on the one hand, but then also compliance and oversight on the other hand. So I think what we're asking here is not meant to be in any way duplicative or going against what the state board does, but rather really step in a way that supports, in a way that's unique to charters and has this bridge that I think Director Lambert is talking about. And so as we've talked with the legislature about some of the challenges and crises we've had, a lot of what they've emphasized is having appropriate governance, making sure that board is educated and trained and overseeing the staff, and the interaction is appropriate. So that's part of what these support staff would do. On the back end, we're trying to make sure we have some tools that the state board doesn't have. We have specific oversight process that puts you in a warning notice and probation and closure. And so some of our own auditing and investigation needs would be so that we're fully informed in how to use those tools that have been delegated to us, and then coordinate with the state board that has its own set of tools that they're ultimately using. So we see it as a very collaborative process.
I'm not seeing a lot, but I'll dive into a couple.
Do you have a follow-up?
Oh, you're still on. Okay.
Yeah, I do have. Thank you for that clarification. I don't want to misspeak, so I'm going to tread a little bit carefully. But I have heard from some folks here that their preference would be to monitor a state charter school board, as the state charter school board monitors the charter schools. I don't know, this probably goes back to that long MOU conversation that's been going on for years that maybe needs to resurrect at some point, where we really hammer down who's gonna do what, and how are we going to partner together, and in what areas of special ed or finance or different things. So I just want to throw that out, that I think we still maybe need some communication. How that's going to evolve, I don't know. But my other question is, some of us have been approached also by some other folks in the charter world that are requesting, I think it was it 400,000, Superintendent, I don't know if you remember, for additional monies for administrative help to do administrative duties so they can be in better compliance. Is this something that is part of this at all, or is that a separate request? Because the conversation that we had with that person was, it's kind of late in the season, so I didn't feel like I could give a lot of support there, but then I'm gonna feel bad if we're. Now, is that part of this, or are you aware of that, or where does that fit with what's happening here?
We are aware of it. It is not part of this, and our board has not taken a position on it.
So one of my concerns is we're at this point in the game, right, with the session started and things are rolling out. I want to applaud you for your work that you've done this past year with onboarding schools, and then we've got some offboarding too, as you as an authorizer. But I see this, in order for this to work, if I put myself in your shoes, to be the portfolio managers, I put myself in the portfolio manager's shoes. It's a conduit between the board and the school, but there's already existing conduits through, there's association, Royce Van Tassel's and others that, who does a charter school go to solve their problems or their challenges, or they have a question, and they have the association, and I'm trying to do the comparables from that a district school will have. The district schools have USBA for support, and they kind of collaborate and come up with solutions. But every LEA has access to USBE and staff and that to if they have a question of what right looks like, they can ask the question. So I'm not confused. I see where you're going on this, but in order to really have it roll out effectively, I would almost have to say you've got to be, the state charter school board's got to be in the game as you're onboarding a school to have that training piece. And then as you're doing that training piece, then you have that's where you start the relationships. And then you can be into the monitoring helpline, whatever it is that your portfolio people are going to be doing. I don't think they're going to get in the compliance business because the State Board of Education we haven't surrendered that yet. We know our role. But I'm not sure how you'll be successful with your portfolio people unless you are the first ones in to say this is what right looks like and have full control of that, and then get into the continued help or propping up.
If I can speak to right now, what we have even with our current staff is once a school is approved, we have a staff member meeting with that new school every other month. So that's even before they open. They're meeting with them, they're going over I don't know how long the checklist has become, but it is many, many pages of just things that we know the school needs to do and checking in and seeing how they're doing. I see the portfolio managers being able to just increase that ability. Because you are correct, it is at the get-go with these new schools that need the most help, because if they start strong, they usually continue strong.
Any other questions or comments from board members?
So I did
Yes.
send.
Oh, Board Member Lear.
And that was that I think, I keep hearing we want to collaborate, but we're different. And I feel like everything I hear is more similar to traditional education in schools than different. And I acknowledge the autonomy of charter schools, but every LEA you would talk to would say, every school district would say, we do things differently. It's the Granite way. It's we do things differently in Rich. We have a unique environment. So I think there's the autonomy issue for every single school district also. So I don't think that's different. And the other thing that I am going back to, and I will keep going back to, is that we both the state board and the charter board do both technical assistance and monitoring. We don't do both encouragement and monitoring. Just the nature of the systems. There's not a way that if what you're asking for is the charter board to do only encouragement, and Delena's example of getting to the edge of the cliff and we want to help you there, and rather than be the ambulance, we all want that. We want that for every single school and school district. And so I think we're all in the monitoring and we're all in the encouragement business. And that's why I think we are more similar than we are different, given the governance differences of charter schools. But I think that you will save time if any of these employees are funded by having those employees work side by side with USBE employees and learn what a traditional public, what a public school looks like and what the requirements are for finance in schools, which is exactly the same between charters and traditional schools. And I would like to emphasize the sameness rather than the difference. I don't think we're that different.
Is there any other questions or comments? Did you guys want to finish up with anything? I appreciate you being here.
I really want to thank you for hearing our request and for considering it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, we're still on this line item. We have a time certain in about 7 minutes. The grumpy timekeeper, I guess. Unless we have a volunteer, if somebody else who wants to do. Oh, that's me. I'm the grumpy. Okay,
So, Chair, then staff just would respectfully request what the board's direction on is, superintendent's point earlier, the deadline's tomorrow. So do you want us to forward these business cases to the LFA and say, or not? We need to know how to proceed.
so this is a big moment.
I mean, the one, again, is already in the legislation, and they talked to that one, but the additional one, the portfolio managers, is not on your list, or, as far as I know, hasn't been submitted to the LFAs yet, so.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
So I have a question then. So your question, to understand your question. So your question is anything that we forward tomorrow, the deadline is what they will see as our, all of our requests? And
Right, we've added to the list as an additional business case to the 35, 38, so it'd be 39,
what was the addition?
the portfolio managers.
Okay, the portfolios managed.
Well, we
So
haven't
all of those are
taken
going, so
motion.
we're saying you need a motion to add that to?
Yes.
Right.
That, okay. So I move that we add the State Charter School Board's business cases to the list.
Do I have a second? Okay, discuss, did you want to speak to your motion? Board Member Belknap?
Thank you, Chair. After reading that, I'm not sure it was clear, and it's to the motion. I'm not sure it was clear what they were exactly going to do with those funds, how they, I mean, I know it's listed out by the number of people, but what are those people really going to do, and how is it going to relate to our office? Can we amend that, or do we not have time to have them add what those people, how they're going to relate back to our office and have? I'm asking a question. Can I make
Well,
an
you can
amendment
amend, you
that
can amend the
that's
motion
added?
to say, to include the detail that was outlined today into the business case.
Yes.
It isn't written. You could ask for that,
Yes, I'd like
or-
to amend that to say that.
oh, what did I do? Oh, okay, she took the mouse away from me. Okay, or without objection, we could,
Okay, hopefully without objection. we
without
would add
objection,
that.
that would be included.
Add
in
that
these.
details.
Can you amend your? or- Brittany, are you good if that, to have that included in your motion, that the better clarity as that was specified would be included in the business case? Okay,
So if I understand correctly, you're asking to add that the State Charter School Board clarify the business case to include some of the clarity they added today in our discussion.
correct. Is where your motion, so your
Yes.
motion is to move the business case forward with that clarity to be included.
So, and clarity meaning the information on what each of these positions and the collaboration that will be taking place?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Scott?
So I'm sure this will help. So the way the Public Education Appropriations agenda is right now, the SCSB is scheduled to come forward on Tuesday. So then that, by virtue of whether or not, if you pass this out and we add it, then it would go forward to the LFA ahead of the deadline. Then when they're asked to come forward, they would present both the bill and conceptually to PEA, and that's when they could answer those questions. Because I'm sure that legislators are going to want to know those same salient details as well.
But we can
Okay,
put.
that's fine.
We can put that in or make sure
Sure,
it's included in
yeah.
the business
Right.
case.
So, which could be backups to the PEA
Correct.
agenda for when they come forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. Let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the ayes, raise your hand. Board Member Scott Nielsen, Board Member Jenny Earl, Board Member Cannon, Board Member Newell, sorry, went blank. Board Member Cindy Davis, Board Member Belknap, was your hand up? Board Member Mike Haynes, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Is anyone on the line?
I'm an aye.
Okay. Mark Huntsman. Well, the nays, do we have the nays? Board Member Lear, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Scott Hanson. Okay, the motion passes. Okay.
So, Chair, just before we, one other thing. Well, let me just go to staff. Dale, do you have anything else for the benefit of the group? Deborah? Patrick? Okay, then, subject to any other questions or concerns related to this specific agenda item, your budget request for 2021, that concludes our briefing.
Okay, and I think that's it, but we need to be prepared as a board in our Thursday meeting to be prepared to speak if we're going to be tweaking anything, because we're going to learn some things between now and then, okay? So we'll make sure we get a memo out to whatever we've learned, so you don't discover it at our board meeting. Are we good for that, Scott?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You know, the timing of this, if I may, Chair, real quick, just to expand on what you're saying. Timing is everything, right? So there's 2 more public education appropriations meetings before you convene again on Thursday. So yes, if there's going to be other changes to prioritization, reductions in requests or anything like that, we really need to do that next Thursday, so.
Yes.
At the
Okay,
latest.
Yeah. Thursday's a big day.
Yes.
It'll be one of our biggest priorities is to make
Yes, sir.
sure.
Okay.
We'll make sure we
Yeah.
allow that time. Okay, I'm not seeing any other, do we have our time certain here do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, that concludes that portion of our legislative request. We're not ready to go to lunch. We have a time certain. Where was it at? No. Okay. Is Representative Polson here? Do you know?
She's almost here.
Not here.
Almost here. She's
Almost here. I don't think we can, let's do our audit committee report while we're waiting. I don't want to break for lunch, so. Turn the time, we're going to go to item, and I appreciate your patience and flexibility with our agenda today. So we're going to go to item 8, which is the audit committee report, and who chairs the audit committee is committee chair Brittany Cummins. Let me turn this on, okay.
There's no action from the board, from the audit committee, but please reference your audit committee report for information about discussions. Thank you. That concludes our report.
Wow, okay. That. Okay, let's go back to legislation. Angie, we might as well take advantage of the few minutes that we have. Every minute's counting today. Are you good? Board Member Jenny Earl.
Well, I actually wanted to ask a question on a piece of legislation.
Okay. All right, we'll
I'll wait
reserve it
till-
till she gets set
Yep,
up,
I'll wait till she's ready.
and then we'll. So we'll end up going to this after lunch too, but.
Good morning, board members. And I have a text from Megan that she and Representative Polson are on their way. There were some problems with the shuttle, so it'll probably be 10 or 15 minutes before Representative Polson arrives due to some shuttle issues, so.
Okay, I don't think we break for lunch and then
No.
come back into this, so
No,
let's work through it. Thank you.
So we have the list here, which is up on Civic Clerk, and I did receive some requests from board members to put certain bills at the top of the list, so you'll see that they are there. So if you wanted me to, I could start, I was planning to start with HB 242, unless somebody would like me to
Okay, we
do
have a-
something different.
I did,
Did you want to,
yeah, I just have I don't know if it's procedural or exactly what, but this is on the House Bill
10, which I'd asked you about. And I'm just curious, how do things from the State Office of Education or State School Board or, whatever within that realm end up on here? And what I mean by that is there's repeals on here, and I guess I'm asking how that happens. And I don't know if you know for sure, or if there's someone that has that information. So,
Okay.
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, I missed, which one are you talking specifically?
House Bill 10?
Okay,
That's
House
the
Bill
third,
10.
on
Thank you.
number 5 on the list, so we did prioritize it to the top
Okay.
of the list.
Okay, do you want to speak to
Jeff Van
that?
Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board. So House Bill 10 is similar to House Bill, I think it was 370 last year, or 307, excuse me. Typically what happens in this process is an interim committee will get together and they want to basically kind of do a sweep and look at, are we requiring too much? Do we have too many committees? Do we have too many task force? Whatever the case may be. The board has done similar exercises in the past. And then they will run a bill to either get rid of or place like an expiration date or sunset clause on certain commissions if they can't figure out or see a reason for why it exists. Strategically, committees will often kind of overload the list and then run a bill and say those who are concerned and actually want their thing to keep going on will come out of the woodworks and ask for an amendment to the bill. And those who don't, we assume they're fine with it going away. But it really, the idea is they just kind of throw everything on the list and they kind of review it all during the interim and attempt to eliminate what they think is unnecessary.
Okay, so that's a mix of who would be making those decisions? Is that from our office, or is that a mix of, that's a legislative? Okay,
Just like you have the Education Interim Committee that we can present to and they make decisions, this was, forget which interim committee it was, either it was
It was
GovOps
economic, yeah, economic development, I believe.
Okay.
That may-
So they can, yes, without consulting any of these groups, could actually review every committee on the books in state code and make recommendations for a bill that would repeal or sunset any of them.
okay, so specifically then, line 2935, which this was an exhaustive bill to go through, by the way. But 2935, it creates the State Instructional Materials Commission, is repealed, so they've got a repeal date on that. That's why I was wondering, how do they make that decision, especially since we just heard this morning, about the value of it. So I'm just wondering how it gets off there. I was wondering how it got on there too, but I'm wondering how it gets off there as well.
So currently, just so that the board is aware, we are working with the sponsor to pull that off, as well as the UPAC. UPAC's advisory council has also been added to this list. We did not participate in this bill or the interim committee that created this list, so we're not exactly sure what led to these specific items being put on versus others. But we do have a
Okay.
request in to remove both, and we're waiting to hear back.
Could we also add to that, I don't know if any made a motion, but the 2939, when I checked with the advisory council for the Utah Schools of the Deaf and the Blind, that's also on there to be repealed next year. When I checked with her to ask what they knew about it, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name right offhand, the lady that was over this was new news to her. So, I mean, I just think maybe we ought to be double checking on these committees. And maybe they're not necessary, but it just seems to me those were some pretty significant ones that somehow got put on a list. So that's why I was wondering, what is the process for this? And, anyways.
If I may,
Yes.
just to reiterate, we were not asked before this bill was numbered if we had an opinion on those entities. But I wanted to give you some clarification as we have reached out to ledge staff and the sponsor. The process is, or what I think the sponsors intend, was to put that repealer on there, but then have the subject matter committees actually have maybe us come and present the reasons why those kind of require us to justify why the legislature shouldn't repeal those 3 committees. And so I think that the sponsors wanted all of these committees to be addressed by different committees over this next interim. Have people like us come and say, no, we really think we should keep these 3 committees, and then let that committee that interim committee such as the Education Interim Committee, then make a recommendation back to Representative Roberts to say, no, let's go ahead and strike that repeal date. So we are actually trying to eliminate those committees from the bill, so we don't even have to go through that process. But that's worst-case scenario. If they remain in the bill, it would trigger a process whereby we'd have to go to the Education Interim Committee, explain the role of those three committees, and then ask the Education Interim Committee to strike those repealers.
So let me just make sure I understand this in my mind. So they meet sometime during interim, and they look at the list, and they cross out which ones they think shouldn't be there, or which ones should be repealed. Then they submit it as a bill, and then if we don't catch it per se, then we have to go justify to them why, and then it has to be resubmitted in a bill next year?
Yes.
That's an interesting process. Wouldn't it be easier to contact the individuals and check with them? Kind of, anyways, okay, I just was trying to understand what that process was so that we, you know what I mean, we're staying on top of, instead of having to duplicate our time or whatever to try to yeah, okay.
Please continue. Why don't you update where we're at and give us, start some updates? I know you had an intro and some updates and.
Sure. Yes. So I was just going to go start with HB 242. But before I do that, I just wanted to make a quick note that HJR 13, which was a resolution that we reviewed last week, does have an amendment that's been proposed to strike the elected from the Constitution. If you remember, this is the resolution that would change the Constitution to say that this board could be elected or appointed as provided by statute. The amendment would now strike the elected so that then the constitutional change would simply say appointed. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. The amendment has not, it's HJR 13. Yeah. And that has not gone to committee yet, which is where then that amendment would be discussed. So HB 242, Charter School Operations Amendments, is a bill that Representative Moss is running and covers quite a few, and let me pull that bill up. Most, actually, of this board's Charter School Task Force recommendations. And so I don't know how much detail you want, but I did go through our Charter School Task Force report, and I highlighted each of the recommendations and which line numbers were covered under HB 242. And there are some amendments that aren't exactly the same wording as what we had in our task force recommendations, but they meet the spirit of what the task force recommended. So just to go through, you may remember that the task force recommended that the state required charter schools to use GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board accounting standards. If you look on lines 74 through 77, you'll see that there is language in there that requires charter schools to use the same fund accounting methods and standardized account codes that all LEAs use. And then also on lines 89 through 92, you'll see that for purposes of compliance with federal and state law and governing the use of public education funds, including restricted funds, and making reports, that a charter school is a government entity and is governed by the Public Education Code. So those are the two sections of the bill that cover the first recommendation. The second recommendation, you'll remember, was to maintain charter schools as nonprofits, and that maintains in the bill. There was no change needed for that. But then with some caveats or requests for additional changes to statute. So if I go on to the consensus statements that were in the task force, there's the first change was requiring that when charter schools are approved, a new charter school is approved, that they be approved as a provisional charter for 3 to 5 years, and then after that allowing the authorizer to then make that permanent or an evergreen charter, as we speak to sometimes. That is on lines 41 through 50, and you can see the process there. The next part was on 210 through 228. It addresses providing the authorizer the ability to appoint a receiver if a court doesn't do that. So it directs a court to appoint a receiver to handle any issues related to a school closure. And then the next two, which were related to subpoena power. I know that those who worked on this draft, currently, the state auditor has the authority to subpoena records, and the state board or an authorizer could request the state auditor to subpoena those records. But in the bill, starting on about lines 122 until about 128, you'll see that the language requires charter schools to provide any documentation that an authorizer requests, and also requires charter schools to include in their contracts with any entity a requirement that at any time that entity needs to provide documentation to demonstrate the charter school's financial compliance with federal or state law, and that it is the property, those documents are the property of the charter school. And then there's two more. The last two are related to providing an authorizer the authority to remove certain individuals from either the board or an executive director or financial officer, for example, and then allowing that to not be overruled by the local charter board for up to 1 year. And all of that language is kind of here at about lines 183 through 199. One other addition that I just note that's of interest is there's some language in here that talks about when a charter school closes, that the students from that closing charter school may receive priority enrollment in another charter school, and the authorizer can help facilitate that with a receiving or a second charter school to work to get those students who are affected by a closure into another school. And then there are two items, they were consensus items 7 and 8, that are not included in this bill. And both of those were requests of the State Charter School Board that the task force and the board was supporting. So the State Charter School Board could probably speak to why those last two were not put in there, but I'll just note that other than the last two consensus statements, it looks to me like the state, our board's charter school task force's recommendations were incorporated and are included in HB 242.
For the benefit of the board, can you state what the 7 and 8 included?
Sure.
So that isn't included, that is excluded
These
from
are
this bill.
correct. These are two that are excluded. So one of the requests of the State Charter School Board was to provide the authority for an authorizer to, what I would say, unilaterally modify a charter agreement without the approval of the charter school. So currently in statute, in order for our charter agreement to be amended, both the authorizer and the charter school have to acquiesce or approve that change. So that's not included in here. The second thing was a clarification that certain funds, it's about $400,000 that are appropriated to us that then have to be provided to an outside trainer or an outside entity to provide training and mentoring for charter schools. The request was to allow some of that $400,000 to be used by the State Charter School Board or our staff, and that is not in here.
Okay, we have some questions on that, so we'll probably want to take a pause right there. We have with us today, glad you could make it, Representative Polson. Did we have anyone else accompanying you, or?
My intern's with me, Caitlin.
Oh, okay. All right. We have a time certain for you, and so here you are, and the time is yours.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me come and present this bill. This is one of my favorite audiences. I'm Representative Marie Polson. I represent District 46 in it's Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, Cottonwood Heights, Holiday, Murray, Midvale. And Also, my experience before being a legislator is that I was a high school English teacher. I'm a retired high school English and history teacher, and so I love being with students, and I love being with those that represent and come from the education field. So I'm here today to just tell you about my bill, which is HB 175. You might find this a little bit familiar. This is an issue I've worked on for a couple of years, and I have to say that as a representative in my area, I represent those people, but because I'm a former teacher and a retired teacher, I kind of feel like I represent every educator in the state. And this is an issue that everywhere I go the last few years, when I go to the grocery store or any place, people back me into a corner and they complain about this one thing. And they say, can't you just change this? And I say, I will try. So what HB 75 does is it removes the requirement on the State Board of Education to use a single letter grade when assigning an overall rating to a school. And I'm sure you know the history, but in case there's someone here that doesn't, let me just give you a little bit of background here. I was in the legislature in 2011 when SB 59, the School Grading Act, was passed. And I think there were some good intentions here. They thought it would be very simple to have a single letter grade when evaluating the school, and this was based mostly on test scores in core subjects. And from the very beginning, the bill was kind of controversial. I didn't like it much as an educator. And at the time, many expressed the concern that grading might accurately represent the affluence or the poverty of the community, but not the true accountability of the school. And at the time, also, I felt like a single letter grade was perhaps too simplistic. And let me just explain, using the example from a school in the district I represent, which is Kenyon School District. Midvale Elementary, this is a school where several years ago I substituted. And when I was there, I taught a second grade class. And in my second grade class, there were about 30 students. And of those 30 students, only 4 of them spoke English. And I spent a couple of days there, and I came away just in awe of the Herculean efforts made by those educators there. And also, nowadays, this school represents a family homeless shelter. And so if this school, and it has suffered from this, if it received a D or an F, you would make a very quick judgment on the school without realizing this simplistic grade doesn't really take into account all the good work that's going on in that school. If you can imagine serving a homeless shelter, those educators are basically keeping kids alive, making sure they get fed, a lot of other things. And I would like for a school for somebody looking up the evaluation of the school to see some of those issues, just not the single letter grade that represents that school. We'd make a very quick judgment with a D or an F. But if we knew a lot of the circumstances and some of the special programs at that school, it would be much, much different. Of course, you know that 2 years ago, and we took a moratorium from the single letter grade, and that you came up with the dashboard system, which I think is highly superior. I've spent a lot of time looking on the dashboard and looking at the schools in my area, and I love the many indicators. We still have those indicators such as developing and typical and commendable, and that does, it's on a percentage, and people can see that. But also with the dashboard, there are other indicators, and schools are able to brag about some of the wonderful programs that they have. And I think this requires us to look deeper and not make that snap judgment. I certainly, in making this effort, would not want to say that we're giving any kind of excuses for schools that serve special needs or impoverished populations. Those are the people that have suffered from this snap judgment. We have high expectations of those kids. We want them all to succeed. And I know you want them all to succeed. But in evaluating a school, I think we need to look at all kinds of things, and we need to force people to look deeper. So what my bill does is just removes that requirement from you, that leaves the dashboard in place, and there are a lot of good reasons why the dashboard is superior. It makes us all look deeper. It's not so simplistic. You know, there's been a move somewhat to competency-based education too, and that trend, it makes sense with that trend to look at many indicators, not just a single letter grade. But I think the very best reason for doing this is that when we took that moratorium a couple of years ago, it was like a breath of fresh air in inversion for those educators that have been serving in those schools. You know, I've taught Title I. I've been there. I've also taught honors, and I know that I work so hard working with students with special needs, and we certainly don't want to create a system that discourages our best and brightest teachers from wanting to serve in schools that are developing or have critical needs. We don't want to put that label on them so that it discourages them from doing that. And I think this change also is a really good non-monetary way to retain and recruit good educators, to keep them in the system. So that's a simple explanation. It's something I feel really strongly about as an educator. And I know that when I presented this bill yesterday in Education Committee and it passed, groups like the School Boards Association said, you know, if this is one thing they could, that would be their number one desire to change, just to keep those, recognize our educators for the things that they do in multiple areas, not just that testing. So I'm just open to any questions that you have for me.
Okay, thank you, Representative. We do have some questions. Board Member Lear.
Hi, thank you for coming up here on this snowy day. I have two sort of very direct questions. I was in the committee yesterday that heard your bill, and they seemed, it was one vote shy of unanimous, and they seemed.
It was unanimous.
Oh, I thought there was
Yeah,
one
it
person
was
who voted no.
unanimous.
Good. I'm sorry, I misspoke. And they seemed just totally supportive. And so my first question is, do you feel like this will be a successful effort this year? I mean,
Well,
and
you
that's
know,
not a rhetorical question. It's,
here's a really good argument for this year. The discrepancies, the problems we had with the administration of the RISE test, you know, makes it difficult for you to publish results because some people are skeptical of the results. So I think that happening it might push people to consider it because it's still in the statute. The single letter grade is still in the statute, but this is a kind of a special circumstance this year, so this is 2 years without that, and the world hasn't come to an end. And I think parents are really pleased. I've not heard a complaint from a parent who would like to have that, so I think people are really pleased. I do have some people in the Senate that, you know, are just not because they, you know, that are like, it's just honoring past people that may become, so we've got to work it in the Senate. I think people will be very supportive in the House.
thanks.
And a follow-up to that
Yes,
quickly.
follow-up.
Second part was, I think this board has for 2 or 3 or 5 years supported you in this effort.
Last year.
And the board has changed in very many directions, and I think still you have support for this effort. So I would ask, and the board hasn't voted, so I don't want to suggest that, but what could those of us who support you and hopefully the full board, what can we do to make this discussion go away?
Work with people in influence that, you've created the dashboard. I think the dashboard is far superior, and I think everyone would agree. It still has those elements that, those
Typical
commendable and
superhero,
and you can
yeah.
all look at that. But if you're for an educator teaching in a school, we say, oh, this school is critical needs. Critical needs is different than an F. It really is, and because now I went into education because I wanted to change the world, and they do as well. They are committed to those children. They want to do well, and let's honor educators. That's the argument I have.
Okay, thank you.
To kind of honor some of the past, as I've talked to legislators about this bill, there were some reasons behind it, and then they're looking, so what happened with that evolution or is this a process of evolution of the school grade, the dashboard? And based on results, this dashboard that we presently have kind of meets that objective of being transparent and
I
on the
think so.
school and stuff. So there's still a win with that, because part of that school grade and the dashboard thing did bring all of this
Right.
to a certain place. But as I've talked to them, I said, so the dashboard is working. Parents look at it, educators, it's been a nice compromise here for the last couple of years. And so
I think so, and for those that want those clear tests on course, those core subjects, those tested subjects are only 20% of the subjects being taught in a middle school or high school. So wouldn't you want to have the whole school represented, just not that? I mean, if I was teaching foreign language or choir or something, I want the school to be looked at holistically, not just by those few subjects.
So I think the win through all that effort's the way we have the dashboard today. And so I think there's a lot of momentum on that dashboard. So that's what
Yeah.
I've been speaking to.
I applaud you for the dashboard. The dashboard
Board
is-
Member Cannon.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for sponsoring this bill yet again. And I for one, really hope that this time it successfully passes. You spoke and gave an example of Midvale Elementary. And Midvale Elementary is sort of dear to the hearts of those of us on the board. It was a turnaround school.
Right.
And we had them come because they had not been able to exit turnaround. So they were given an extension. And in January, there was an article in the Deseret News that said they have started turning around their schools. They have no longer are in critical needs status. They are now in a developing status. They had a commendable rating for their student growth. And I just thought, these people have all the chips stacked against us, and they are making this work. And so I'm thrilled, and I loved the way that the article talked about all of the things on the dashboard and how they are improving. So I'm hoping that that can be the way of the future, and thank you for leading the charge.
Yeah, and sometimes, I know at the legislature, sometimes you work on things for a long time, and then all of a sudden, there you go.
Board Member Belknap.
Thanks, Representative, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily for you but I'm interested in, if the change does happen, how is this going to affect some of the other statutes that require a grade, like turnaround? So that
It
would be
doesn't,
one.
we fixed it so it doesn't affect turnaround.
Okay.
In the drafters.
Is that the
did.
second, I think that
Yeah,
might be
the
the second thing.
drafters, and then we
Okay,
just
and
went
are
through
there other
the,
things that we have that are requiring that we're gonna have to work on?
not that I'm
That
aware
you're
of.
aware of? Okay.
All that, we went through the statutes and just removed the A, B, C, D, and just put the dashboard.
Representative Polson, there's not any other questions or comments. Thank you for being here today. Do you have anything more for us?
And thank you, your van came to get me. I broke my wrist right before the session, so still.
We're ready to.
No,
take
yeah,
it back.
so I'm
Okay.
phobic about the ice. Anyway.
Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Be careful. Okay, way we left it is Vice Chair Brittany Cummins had a question. Well, let's break, but she has it written down. Let's break for. Okay. Let's have let's try to have a half-hour lunch. If it has to be a little longer, I understand, but let's do our best to be back in here by like 17 after, so by 20 after we are doing it. Thank you for accommodating on schedule. I'm pretty sure we can stay on, so we won't be here very late, so thank you. Should we do one more walk? I don't know where Laura ended up. Okay. Board members, if we can get you to take your seats, we'll get started. We're short a few. Thank you. What was Jefferson? House Bill 42. One, two, three, four. I don't see Laura anymore.
I know. Yeah, right.
Was that your pen? Okay. Board members, we're going to get started. Where we left off, now we've got some great security here with our highway patrol, and there's a handful of them around, and they're actually getting familiar with the building, a little training, a little orientation of what we have going on, and we're certainly glad that they're here. They're all part of our public safety and appreciate their service, especially when the weather's bad and all that. These highways can be pretty wicked. So that's what's going on when usually we have one, sometimes two, but usually one, but there's four here, so I just wanted to explain that. Okay, where we left off was we were on House Bill 242, and Deputy Superintendent Stallings was going through the charter school task force recommendations, and we got everything kind of into the bill, except for there was a couple things at the end that the charter board was going to work on. And so, let's see, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins had a question or comment. You're good? Okay, so. Oh, well, I don't have, there we go. You guys are too kind. You turn it on and turn it off. So, Board Member Lear.
I just had a question. When we were talking about line 122 in HB 242, and it says, if I can get there, shall provide to the charter schools, well, first of all, I would like it to say, a charter school shall provide the charter school's authorizer and the USBE, just because we seem to be the final cleaner-upper.
financial compliance with federal or state law. So that's just one thought. I don't know if you'll have any influence about that, if that bill, as that bill changes, which I'm sure it will. But the other question I had was, does this mean, it talks about a subsidiary, which of all the words that we've come up with, that subsidiary was not one of them. So this is a new word. But does that mean a charter management company?
That's a good
Yes.
question. And so,
Yeah,
did
go
you want
ahead.
me to go forward? So usually charter management companies, so they'll have a contract with, and so that would be
Or any
an organization with which the charter school contracts or a subsidiary. And I think that I actually asked our charters, state charter school board colleagues a little bit ago why they chose that word also. And they were trying to cover anybody who might have a relationship with the charter school, but not necessarily have a contract that covers that relationship. And so it was meant to be kind of a broad word at this point. And if we were to define it, I asked the exact same question you asked to them, and they just said it was a word they chose to kind of describe a relationship with somebody who might have documentation, documents that should be the property of the charter school, but there's no contract in place. So they're trying to keep that broad to give them that authority. And one thing, if I might, I would just state that the language on lines 125 through 128 can also be a help, not just to the authorizer, but to the state board, because it's saying that the charter school shall include in their agreement with the subsidiary or the contract with the organization they're contracting with, a provision that the documents that are necessary to demonstrate compliance, and that would likely be not just compliance that the authorizer would want to verify, but we would want to verify that they are the property of the charter school. So in a lot of ways, I think that without it stating anything about the state board, 125 through 128 would absolutely help the state board as well as the authorizer.
As long as, can I just follow up with one statement? As long as the school was being cooperative with the state board. We've certainly had an experience recently where the school didn't want to share with the state board. And it's helpful if we're sort of working together with the school to get something from another body or entity, but not always. That's why I would love in there, and I don't know if, not a formal motion, but I would ask that you kind of keep, be alert to opportunities for maybe inserting the state board in there. As long as we're going to have to do the dirty work at the end, we should be able to have information earlier on to help us help the charter and the authorizer to do a better job.
Maybe we could ask them to amend to put the charter school's authorizer or the board on lines one.
I'm sure that there'll be some resistance, but it does make some sense if they expect us to be the monitor, the bad guy in the end. I keep saying that. Thanks.
So I think also this is so new that as this is rolling out, we didn't craft it. We didn't really put it together. It's barely come out, but we need to probably vet it with our, maybe even with our AAGs. This is a very significant bill. If we're supportive of the intent, that we go through all of the language carefully. Words do matter. It's amazing how just one little word can throw a monkey on our back and all over the place, and we don't want that. Okay. Board Member Belknap.
Thank you. I tried to find it during break, and I should have asked, but is it where the students get priority if a school has closed? It may get priority? It's a may?
I think it says shall. Let me get there. It's right at the end. An authorizer, it's the authorizer may permit a specified number of students from a closing charter school to be enrolled in another charter school if the receiving charter school is authorized by the same authorizer and agrees to accept enrollment applications from the students from the closing charter school, and a receiving charter school shall give then shall, if that, it seems like because they have to agree to accept enrollment applications, it's weird, because there's kind of like some permissive language in 370 through 371, but then it says shall in 372 through 373. So you've kind of got almost like a contradiction there, so.
That's what I was thinking, Chair. May I finish? Because I think it's really important that we don't tell a charter school they have to take these kids from another charter school. And so I would maybe ask the same question Carol did, that on a different subject, that you would look at this and see if there's a way to make this so it's a may take those students from another school. Thanks.
Board Member Davis?
I was just sharing this with one of our charter board members in the back, but I did get an email from someone who was concerned, saying if the state charter board is transferring the students to another charter, if they are like a director of a charter or something and the students go to that person's school, would there be a conflict of interest? Would they be, and I said, I really don't know. You could talk with Representative Moss about that. So I don't know if that person will contact him or not, but there was a concern that somehow one charter would get preferential student transfers over another.
Okay, any other discussion on this? Oh, we have not taken any position of support. Board Member Davis?
I move that we support
House Bill
HB
242.
242. And I'd like to speak to the motion.
Do we have a second? Second. Board Member Hanson, let's speak to the motion.
You know, as we look over the 13 consensus statements that came out of the State Charter Task Force, and as we look over Representative Moss's bill, most of those are in this bill. And I think from what I have read, he stayed pretty true to what was coming out of those, with those recommendations. So I move to support this.
Okay, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
I'll second.
What's that?
I'll give a second. Mine is discussion, so.
Oh, okay, so you support that discussion. We have a motion before the board is to support House Bill 242. All in favor?
So just, I have a question.
Okay, hang on. I didn't call for a vote. Oh, you had a question. I thought you said you were in support. Go ahead.
So was that last bit that talks about enrollment preferences, was that part of the Charter School Task Force? Could I'd like to amend the motion then. So, so support and ask the bill sponsor to look at those last few lines about enrollment and consider some of the ramifications of that. So some of the questions that were considered, such as preferential treatment for the State Charter School Board towards one charter school over another, or the impact that it has on the, I guess, the possible conflict between that last line and the lines above it. So really getting clear as to what the intent of those lines are.
So that's an amendment to the motion to support. Is there a second? Second. There's other lines. Any discussions to that amendment? I don't have to repeat it. We have it, but, okay, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, voting was unanimous. Okay, hang on, go ahead,
I just had one question about Board Member Lear's recommendation to add the board on those lines at around 122. Would you also like me to ask about that, or I wasn't quite sure if that was a request or not?
Without objection, is there any objection to that? I think this is still in, there's no question there's going to be amendments to this, but I don't know if our AAGs, if we vetted this bill very well. So there might be some other things that are coming, that would come forward from it. So I don't, without objection, that would be, you have an objection? I don't have an objection. Okay, well, with that, so just to answer her question, without objection, that would be included. Okay, a question, I want to get to Board Member Lear's question, but
Sorry.
Brittany.
I'm trying not to object because I have a question, is where I'm at. I have a question on that because just at requesting that the board be added, I think is maybe a little bit more than what we need because they already have to give us any records about compliance or state law. And so I'm just curious what would be the purpose of it and, you know, just really digging into what is that place because I don't want a charter school to feel like every time they're submitting documentation that they have to submit it to all these different places. So making sure that when we write it in there that it's really specific as to the task and purpose of the information and not just saying, okay, send everything to the board too. So just being very cautious about that because I don't want to give the impression that anytime you send a document to your authorizer, copy someone at the State Board of Education, so.
That?
Yes.
As I'm looking through those first 6 lines, it's not anything. Shall provide to the charter school's authorizer any information or documents requested by the authorizer to confirm the charter school's financial compliance with federal or state law. So that's where I think it's important. The issues we've had most recently with several charter schools have been compliance with federal or state law that was apparently not discovered or remedied early enough in the process. So Angie asks a good question. I am not wedded to, and the USBE right there. But I think it needs to be clear in response to Brittany's question. It does need to be clearer that the board has a right to that material.
And that's how I took it also,
Okay.
is where you're at, that where it needs to be that we hang on to our, where
Authority.
USBE needs to be included in this document that we're inserted to make sure that we're hanging on, we're not giving up our authority in any way and slightly reinforce. Angie.
Chair, how about if I talk to our monitoring staff, our federal, our staff who have requested documents to see if, I believe we probably already have that authority, as other people have stated, to get documents when we're monitoring or ensuring compliance and check with, I was going to say, and check with our AGs. And then if we need more, we could add it in, but we may be fine. I don't know.
Michelle Buse, AAG. I can answer it to the federal programming. To the federal programming, there is a provision in the federal law that says that any federal grant funds that are made available to a grantee, they're asking for them. And one of the conditions of them receiving those is that they open up their records in their spending of those funds to the SEA, which would be to the State Board of Education. But I cannot at this point answer it to state funds.
Okay, but I don't think help me if I understand this, Angie, we're not rewriting, this is like round 1, and we'll be meeting every Thursday as this thing's evolving. We can be in support of it. That's what's the motion before the table, and there's going to be a little bit of an evolution. And then we have to, as this thing gets pushed through, is do we continue support?
Right.
And that, so, Angie.
The only other thing I wanted to supplement is last Thursday, you all made a motion to have us work on a bill relating codifying that our state monitoring would mirror the standards of our federal. So that bill, I mean, I think that some of what Board Member Lear is saying, we would probably want to apply to all LEAs, not just charter schools. And so we can work on clarifying that along with what we adopted last week. So about the state monitoring standards. Yeah.
And what's really important on this bill is we go to appropriations next week. There's questions on this bill as it's moving forward, and then whether the board is supporting it presently. So I appreciate this being talked about. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Just a quick question on the fiscal note on this. Does it include, is there a fiscal note, and what does it include?
There is, and I think it's, well, I know that there was a submitted fiscal note, I think of around 400-something thousand. Let me look. 425, yep. So there is.
Okay, follow up?
That 425 is, does that coincide with what we heard from the State Charter School Board this morning as far as that, those requests go?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
It addresses the compliance portion, not the.
Board Member Cannon.
I'm sorry, I want to make a motion on a different bill when you're ready.
Okay, I'm going to turn this off so I know, make sure I can get back to you when we're done with this particular item. So the motion before the board is to support House Bill 242 as amended. With as we amended, I guess would be the. What's that?
Well, we added that.
Yeah. Are we still on, is everyone lining up? Are we still on House Bill 242? Yes? Okay. Board Member Lear.
Yes, because we just got a new monkey wrench thrown into things. I don't necessarily support that budget as it was presented, but yet I support this bill for the most part. So what do we do about that?
You can speak to the fact that
I
you
hate to vote
support the
against-
bill, but not the fiscal note, but we still are.
I hate to vote no to the bill because I'm okay about it. I'm not supportive of the 425,000 as it was presented. I would like to see a different configuration of that budget. Showing more collaboration, using more staff that currently exists, having more crossover. So I'm kind of in a quandary about how do you vote for the bill but not the fiscal note.
As in the previous, the board supported a motion earlier and where that collaboration and all of that would to be included in I guess, a case study. And that's going to go before appropriations. So that was mentioned.
But we haven't
All of those
seen it
other
yet.
things that we'll make sure that's included as they shared in our board meeting. We wanted, the motion was to make sure that was included.
So to get me off this queue,
So-
I will just say I'm going to vote no until I
Okay.
see all of that.
Which is fine.
But
Yep.
I'm not totally unsupportive of these ideas. I just want to see them before I vote for them.
Okay. Board Member Davis.
Is it possible to make an amendment to support the bill with the caveat on the fiscal note of getting the information that we asked for this morning?
Well, yes, but the board already previously supported this as a legislative ask, and so now if you take it out, you're saying I don't want to support it as a legislative ask because I don't want the ask attached to the bill. I don't want a fiscal note attached to it. So is that what you're trying to do, is separate the fiscal note? Board Member Cannon?
I'm just thinking due to we don't really have the right to amend someone else's bill. We can certainly suggest some things, but in view of wanting to have some things adjusted and with a concern about the fiscal note, my suggestion would be that rather than coming out with full support, we go with support concept. Could I make an amendment to the motion that rather than coming out full support, that we instead do support concept?
You certainly can make that amendment, and let's see if it passes. So is that your amendment? Well, are we adding or taking away? No, you're not adding or taking anything away from it. It would be a separate motion. Because you're not adding or taking away from anything on the first.
No, but I'm just acknowledging that are some people with concerns, and I think supporting the concept might give us an opportunity or give us some time to address those concerns.
Okay, but the motion is still the motion. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I'd like to speak in favor of the current motion that's on the table. We've already supported the concept through our charter school task force request that we all approved as a board. And we already talked about the concerns that we had with the legislative ask this morning, and we made a motion to request that would only be added to our appropriation list with the details that we've already talked about, which was the job descriptions and the added cooperation, et cetera. And so that's already been a motion that we made this morning and we all passed. And so it's not gonna go before the legislature on our quad chart type thing without those things. That's a motion that we already made. And so I support this motion as it is. Appropriations can be adjusted over time. The bill is written, it supports our task force recommendations, it's there. And then the appropriation, obviously in any bill, is something that's negotiated over time. And so I don't think we should halt this process or change it based on the concerns that I think we already have addressed in our board meeting today.
So the motion before the board is to support House Bill 242 as amended in our support. Call that to a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Michelle, are you on the phone?
I'm on the phone. I'm an aye.
Okay, an aye. Motion passes. Okay, we're still on the okay, I think Janet, did you have something? You want to turn your light on? I think you wanted to be in the queue. Board Member Cannon.
Yes, I would make a motion that we support HB 107, Mike Winder's Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program. He was here earlier and we addressed it at some length.
That was House Bill 175?
This is House Bill 107.
Oh, 107, okay, there it is, yeah.
Second substitute.
Do I have a second? Motion and second, you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, we did talk about it. This just adds some additional money so that teachers in grades 1 through 3 can also earn the incentive for teaching in high poverty schools. Representative Winder gave us some information saying that this has helped Granite District in particular retain their teachers. 94% of their teachers that are getting this additional money have been retained, and that the Title I schools have improved proficiency 1% to 2% each year this program's been in existence. So I think that's some pretty good return on investment, and I would like to support this bill.
Okay, the motion before the board is to support House Bill 107, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program amendments. Discussion to the motion, Board Member Lear.
There's no money in the bill. What's the fiscal note on that? He said, I forget.
It was about 480,000. The fiscal note hasn't appeared yet. It doesn't
Right.
look like unless, but he stated it was 480,000.
And then that would come out of the WPU, I'm assuming.
Or it's education fund money, yeah.
Out of education fund. Would it come out of a potential WPU increase, or it would?
It's just a separate 500,
It's just some, but it's not going to
500.
come from the general fund, for instance. It's not
Correct.
going to be more money. Well, there is no more money.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay. The motion before the board is to support House Bill 107, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program amendments. Not seeing any other discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? For the ayes, raise your hand. Board Member Scott Nielsen, Board Member Earl, Board Member Cannon, Board Member Davis, Board Member Newell, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Haynes, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Mark Hanson with the nays. I have there's three, right? Board Member Lear, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Scott Hanson. Okay. Board Member Bolter, are you going to weigh in on this vote?
I'm an aye.
Okay, thank you.
I'm an aye.
Okay, thank you. We've got it. Okay, motion passes. Is there anything else that we need to be addressing, Angie? Oh, board member, I'll give Scott a chance here. Board Member Scott Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that we support HB 58. That's Representative Pulsifer's bill on electronic cigarettes. I think we talked about that a few days ago, but haven't taken any position on it. I'll speak to the
Okay,
motion.
is there
for
a
the
second? Second, want to speak to the motion, please?
Yeah, I think that all of the data that we've seen shows that electronic cigarettes are becoming more of a problem in our schools. I think it's important that we get ahead of this. We've already taken some action in rule, which this legislation supports. I would like, though, to see an addition or a change to the bill as it's currently presented. I'd like to see the addition of marijuana specifically in all the places where the bill calls out, and I'm looking at line 27 is one example, causes of student use of tobacco, alcohol, electronic cigarette products, and controlled substances. I'd like to see tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, electronic cigarette products, and controlled substances. The reason for that, I think the Sharp survey now shows marijuana at about the same level as alcohol. I think the neighboring states around Utah have recreational marijuana as a legal substance. And I think the perception among many of our students is that that is in the same category now as alcohol. And I'd like to see specific training and work done on that.
So would it be safe to say that your motion would be to support House Bill 58 with the addition of marijuana being added to line 27?
And in all other appropriate places. That list is called out many places through the bill. So I'd just like marijuana to be differentiated or pulled out of controlled substances and put in specifically.
Is this? Yes. You have a question? Hey, hang on. Got it.
Okay, sorry, my question on the motion is the motion of support contingent on those changes being made, or is it just direction to staff to seek changes?
It's not contingent on that, so it's direction to staff to seek changes. So support and request to staff to seek those changes to clarify or emphasize that marijuana is specifically needs to be addressed.
So without objection, we'll, okay. We're speaking to the motion. Board Member Janet Cannon, are you speaking to the motion? Okay, Board Member Belknap, you speaking to the motion? Okay,
Chair, I have a couple of questions. Can I go here?
you bet.
On line 408, the disposing of this device, is there some special way it's supposed to be disposed of? Do you smash it? Or are we going to create issues for schools by telling them they have to destroy or dispose of this now? Would be one of my questions.
Yeah, and we already have that.
Can you answer that, Angie?
You know, I think that the policy choice, if we don't say dispose of or destroy, would be to say return it back to the parents and students. And that was absolutely what they don't want to happen. So right now, it's pretty vague as to what dispose or destroy. It's saying it has to be a certain way. It doesn't say you have to hand it over to law enforcement. You could, but the only other alternative would be to then say you return it, probably, because what else would they do with it?
Okay.
But
Okay, another one?
Yeah,
Follow-up?
and then somewhere, and I couldn't find it at this last minute, it tells that the State Board of Education will make a library of.
Best practices.
My question is why do we want to make a library of, what was it? A library of best practices? Or,
Thank you.
what is it? And why do we want to put that in our wheelhouse if the districts are going to make their own policy about how this happens? Why, anyway, help me, why is this here?
We didn't request that. That was a Representative Pulsifer wanted that support for the LEA. She requested that. So
Okay, and what's the fiscal note on this? Sorry, Chair, I had to hurry and get that in there before you told me no.
It's your time.
sorry, let me see.
Chair, could we get Deputy Superintendent Norman to help out with this as well? I know she's been working on the rule.
Maybe we're done with discussion. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I just want you to know, I have some concerns that there's still some holes in this, and that I'm hoping that we could have a discussion with Pulsifer before we oppose or support this.
Okay, does somebody have a specific question for any, that's what we're speaking to the motion here. Board Member Cannon, you're not speaking. Board Member Earl?
I did, but I think I answered it myself. I just wondered if there was overlap between Senator Christensen's bills, but there isn't as far as the relationship with schools. Is that accurate? That it's just the access, right? As far as Senator Christensen's bills, they're pretty separate that way.
Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman. In going through this, we had President Adams go through it with all of those that were having any legislation on vaping and made sure that each bill was distinctly different so that they didn't have any overlap.
I was just checking that.
Yeah.
When we asked about marijuana, I wanted to see if there was that kind of thing, so.
Board Member Lear?
I just have a concern I want to raise for our discussion and the record such as it is, and that is, I'm concerned about teachers being put in the awkward place and perhaps administrators of destroying personal property. And I support the concept 189%. I'm concerned about putting teachers in that situation. The guarantee that they'd have no personal liability, their concerns about their liability, that makes me very uncomfortable.
Okay.
So I will speak to that. So it's disposing or destroying, so they wouldn't necessarily have to destroy. But, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Brian did some research as we were working on this bill with Representative Pulsifer, which led to the rule that we already enacted, that the case law that he looked up showed that as long as an LEA, a district or a school, has a policy that clearly states that if you bring this property onto our campus, we are going to take it from you, we are going to dispose or destroy it, that school has the authority to do that. There would not be a takings issue or et cetera. So we did the research about that before the bill and before we did our rule.
That's helpful. That makes
But
me
they have
feel-
to have the policy in
That makes me feel
place.
better. I just want everybody who weighs in on professional practices issues to remember this discussion. Thank you.
So we have the motion before, hold on, do we have other conversation? Do we need to know? Okay. You have a question on this, Janet? Board Member Cannon.
HB 58, so I was just looking at the fiscal bill, and it's got a $5 million fiscal bill from the education fund. And it talks that money would go to pay a $3,000 teacher stipend and a $1,000 administrative, so much for state administration. Will you explain how that works to me, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In the bill, there's a requirement for every school to have a positive behavior intervention plan. It's a prevention plan. And part of that plan is, the money is to give the $1,000 to the school to be able to support whatever that positive behavior intervention plan would be. And then $3,000 for one or more teachers or employees to be the specialists that support that prevention plan for the school. So there's $3,000 per school for employees to be the specialists that would move that work forward, and then $1,000 for the school to be able to buy things, curriculum, shirts, whatever they want, And I don't know, those are, yeah.
Patty Norman. One of the things that they found is they didn't want it to be a punishment. So kids who are vaping probably have some sort of an addiction. So it's the difference between disciplining it or finding a way to actually make so the at-risk behavior is mitigated. And so that's where the positive behavior support specialists came in to be able to have that sense of connectedness to school. And that's where the research is putting where when kids have more of a sense of connectedness to school, adult, and their peers, then they're less likely to be engaged in these types of behaviors. And that's where it came from.
I didn't hear this very well, but what budget is this coming from?
So currently, if this bill passed by itself, not with Senator Christensen's bill, it would be from the education fund, 5 million. But there's also been talk in other bills that if they increase a tax on electronic cigarettes, that would become the funding source. But that is contingent on a tax being imposed or increased to provide that funding. So I think some of that is to be seen, and probably why Representative Pulsifer didn't put the proactive appropriation at the bottom of the bill, to leave that flexibility to executive appropriations to determine if it comes from the education fund or if it draws from revenue that's collected related to a tax on electronic cigarette products.
So when this went, and it was an interim meeting, I think it was back in December or November, sometime back in there, and the representative was talking about it. The intent was that this tax was, that this would be taxed and this was going to move forward and be, the implementation of these programs would be paid from that. So there is a little bit of a disconnect. Okay, the motion before the board is that the board support House Bill 58 and seek changes where needed. Is that the one? I'm on the right one.
Specifically call it.
To add the word marijuana where needed. Not saying any further discussion, so let's vote on it. Board Member Jenny Earl.
I'm wondering if it might be appropriate for us to table this, and I guess is that the right term, and down the road, meaning I kind of want to see where we're at financially with everything else, because this could have an impact on other priorities, as well as getting questions answered.
You can make a motion to postpone.
To postpone, okay. I would like to make a motion to postpone this vote. I have to, for another Thursday
meeting.
legislative meeting.
Okay. Is there a second? Board Member Cannon, all those in favor to postpone, say aye. But not, is there on to postpone? I thought there wasn't any on to postpone. Oh, okay, yeah, there's discussion, sorry. Thank you for, I thought there wasn't on a postpone, when you postpone. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
My only concern with postponing is part of the motion was to work with the legislator to add the word marijuana, and I think that's better done sooner than later. So. Most of the time, in order to ask staff to move in a direction to change legislation or to request a change, it's come as a motion from the board to do so. So we just need to make sure that that takes place.
The bill sponsor will absolutely know of this meeting and know of our discussions and our concerns of what issues and that. So I think if you'd had a motion to postpone, I'm pretty sure it's going to address that particular issue. But it doesn't guarantee it. But it's not one of support. Board Member Scott Hansen?
I could amend my motion to support this and also direct staff to work on the marijuana issue and also the funding issue with our preference to be that comes from specific tax revenue.
But right now we have a motion to postpone on the table.
Yeah, if I can add, I hesitate to postpone on this. I think that we need to come out
So
strong
you can speak to say if you don't postpone that you're ready to make an amendment.
I can make that alternate motion, but also I hesitate to postpone at this point. I think it's important that we come out strongly in favor of this and get ahead of this I think vaping is a big issue, and we're seeing other issues that are on the rise right now as well.
Okay, the motion before the board is to postpone this motion. Not seeing any discussion, let's vote. This is to postpone. All those in favor say aye. Aye. This is to postpone. Those opposed, say nay. No. Will the ayes raise your hand and be recognized? Board Member Earl, Board Member Belknap. Motion to postpone fails. So
Mark, I'm an aye.
you're an aye to postpone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the motion before the board is to support House Bill 58 and seek changes to include marijuana where appropriate. Is there any other? Okay, hang on.
Yeah, without objection, hopefully, I'll amend that motion
To include the
also
fiscal note.
include a preference to receive funding from a specific tax.
Okay. So is there any objection to have that included in the motion? Okay, seeing none. Let's vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Board Member Bolter, are you voting on this?
I'm an aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, I think those are some of the big rocks. This will be on our agenda next Thursday also. What's that? Yeah, I'm looking to see if, I said this is coming back. I don't see anyone wanting to weigh in, but I see a light now. Board Member Lear. I'm just trying to move this along and not have all the big pauses.
Yes, we're thinking.
Board Member Lear.
I'm interested in HB 175. This is Representative Polson's, the dashboard and doing away with school grading. And I would move that we support the bill. $175.
Okay, we have a motion from Board Member Lear to support House Bill 175, Education Accountability Amendment. I thought I heard a second. Is that what you're?
Yes, I was saying the wrong name.
And you want to speak to your motion? We have a
Pardon me?
second.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the motion.
Do you want to speak to that
Oh,
motion?
do I want to speak to it? Just that I think that the board has been bemoaning this concern and supporting these bills for a number of years, and this is just the latest. And I think Representative Polson is right. I think this timing might be very helpful, and I would hope that we could support this effort.
Okay. All right. Discussion to the motion. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, are you going to ask if there's a fiscal note?
I want to speak in favor of this motion. This is something that our board has been working on for a very long time, is to look at accountability in a very clear, supportive way where we see schools and what they're working on and where those areas of target and support really are necessary. I do want to just make clear that we do have another request that came from our board, which was to ask for a waiver for a year, and that we clearly delineate these two topics and not say that they're the same or conflated in any way, because this is, I believe, a smart move for the state to really look at accountability in a very strategic and open and transparent way, but not giving the impression that we're trying to use what was a big problem. It was difficult for many of our LEAs to deal with, and so not conflating those two issues, but recognizing that we're asking for this waiver for a very specific reason because of some issues that occurred, and we also feel that accountability can become more transparent by removing the single letter grade. So.
Okay, the motion before the board is to support House Bill 175, Education Accountability Amendments. Any further discussion? Question? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Voting is unanimous.
I had one more.
Oh, I forgot. Are you still there? Board Member Bolter?
Yes, I'm an aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lorraine, for reminding me.
And Mark, I had one more
Okay,
if nobody else is.
Board Member Lear.
I'm looking for the bill number. It's the one having to do with the regional, SB 79, Senator Hilliard's Regional Education Service Agencies. First, I'd just like you to take, I think I've heard a couple of discussions since I first heard about this, and I'd like just maybe a little bit more explanation from you, maybe for other board members. And then if we have any board staff opinions about how efficient or effective this would be.
Sure. As a reminder, you received a presentation from the regional service centers, including Superintendent Scott Jones, who worked, and Chair Huntsman, who all worked together with our regional service center representatives and some of the superintendents and local school board members that belong to those service centers. So this resulted from, this bill is a result of a collaborative effort between our office and our regional service center colleagues to come up with a way to change or have the regional service centers now be called Regional Education Service Agencies to receive an ability where we could send money directly to them on behalf of their member LEAs. It clarifies a number of programs that they're allowed to participate in at the state level. It also clarifies what they could do on behalf of their member LEAs. So this proposal, you saw a PowerPoint about this before it became a bill. That presentation went to Public Ed Appropriations Subcommittee, and then Senator Hilliard opened the bill. So this is one of our board, the policy requests that we present to you, and staff have absolutely, as well as Chair Huntsman, have absolutely been involved with our regional service center partners on this bill.
So can I move that we support this bill?
You bet. We have a
May
motion
I?
to support SB 79, Regional, what's it called? Regional Education Service Agency. And we had a second. Okay, Board Member Newell. Any more discussion to the motion? And this computer just went to, it's died. So, nope, there we go. Maybe it went to sleep, but it couldn't because we've been using it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Board Member Bolter? This is,
I'm a no.
you're a no?
Yeah.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, well, this is coming up. I'm also looking at the time, where, again, we're going to be meeting Thursday. Can raise a hand if we need to address something right today. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I can't, while we're getting the computer up, I can't see if you're trying to weigh in. So I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Deputy Superintendent Starling, and we appreciate all your work, and we'll move to our next agenda item.